right, so this is lesson 10-3, which is relate fractions, decimals, and percents. We are going to split this lesson in two, so this is part 1. Okay? So, on your warm-up, I asked you to watch a video in Khan, and you also took out all 3 pages of your homework for the whole week. So, what did you get out of the video? Right. So in the video, they gave you some examples on how we are going to change from fractions, decimals, and percents. Now, by definition, a percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. Okay? A ratio, we already learned that a ratio is written as a fraction. A ratio is written as a fraction, right? When we compare it. And fractions can be written as decimals. So for example 1, we want to write percents as fractions and decimals. So it says here, in a recent survey, 22% of email users claim to spend less time using email because of spam. We want to know what fraction of email users is this? And we want to know what decimal is that, okay? So, we're starting with 22%, okay? And we want to change that to a fraction, and we want to change that to a decimal. Is everyone with me? So the way you're going to write your important information is you're going to write 22%. We're going to change that to a fraction. And we're going to change that to a decimal. We're going to write down what we're starting with. 22%. 22%. And we want to change that to a fraction. Well, remember, 22% means 22 per 100. Very good. Per 100. So we can write 22% as a fraction by writing what over what? 22 over 100. Is everybody clear? Now, when we write fractions, we always what? Simplify. Very good. So we're going to divide by 2 in the numerator and the denominator, and of course that's going to give us 11 50ths. So that is my fraction, okay? So here we have 11 50ths from 22%. Is everybody clear? Yes. So now we want to write 22% as a decimal, okay? Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to what we've done previously. So I'm going to look at the fraction. We're going to look at the fraction, and the reason we're going to look at that fraction, 22 over 100, is because the 100 is one of the place values in a decimal. Is everyone with me? So let's just review the place values. Remember, in the place values, we have tenths. Make sure you write these down. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, we have 10,000 and 100,000, so but you get the idea, right? So here, this says 22 over 100. 22 over 100, the place value is, which one? Hundredths, right? So the place value, I'm going to use, the place value is hundredths. Oh, that's too dark. So you're going to read that fraction correctly, and once you read it correctly, that tells you what the decimal is going to be. Does that make sense? So how do I read 22 over 100 correctly? how do I read 22 over 100 correctly? 22 hundredths. So 22 hundredths, how do I write that as a decimal? Yes, 0.22. So there is my second answer. That is 22% as a decimal. So during his workout, Elon spent 28% of the time on the treadmill. What fraction of his workout is on the treadmill, and what decimal is that? So we are starting with 28%, right? We want to write that as a fraction, and we want to write that as a decimal. Okay, remember how I showed you how to write your important information like that up there. Okay, tells you what you're changing to. So we're going to start with 28%. Okay, we'll start with 28%. Now, again, percent means per 100. So 28% is 28 over 100. Very good. Then, because we're writing as a fraction, we want to simplify it. Always simplify your fractions. So, what can I divide by? I can divide by 4. So divide by 4 in the numerator and the denominator, and that gives me 7 over 25, 7/25. So there is my simplified fraction. Is everybody clear? So there's my first answer. And now I want to write the next thing we want to do is we want to go from a fraction to a decimal. So here, which one am I going to read? Which fraction am I going to read? 28 over 100 or 7 over 25? 28 over 100. Very good. So we're going to read this fraction because it has one of those place values in the decimals, right? So how do I read 28 over 100 correctly? 28 hundredths. And of course, 28 hundredths we write, don't forget the 0 in front, 0.28. And there we have our second answer, which is our decimal. Example 2, we want to write fractions as percents and decimals. So now we're going from a fraction, and we're going to change that to a percent, and we're going to change that to a decimal. Okay? So we're going to start by writing our original fraction, 4/5. So 4/5, we want to write that as a percent. Percent means what? Per 100. Very good. So that means we want to have 100 in the denominator. Is everybody with me? So how do I get from 5 to 100? 20. Very good. Slow down. Multiply times 20. And if I multiply by 20 in the bottom, very good. Multiply by 20 in the numerator. So 4 times 20 is 80. So this is 80 per 100, which is 80 per cent. There's your 80%. Is everybody clear? And there's our first answer. So we've got 80%. Okay? So now we want to write 80% as a decimal. So which am I going to read? Which fraction am I going to read? 80 over 100. I'll read that one, right? So 80 over 100, if I read that correctly, that's, well, how do I read 80 over 100 correctly? 80 hundredths, right? So we're going to write 0.80 hundredths is 0.80, right? I don't want to skip any steps. So my next question was, do I need that trailing zero? No. And so we're going to write 0.8. So 4/5 would be 8/10 as a decimal. Is everybody clear? Okay. So again, you guys, I didn't want to skip any steps, so there it is. So we're starting with 3/5. We want to write that as a percent. Okay? So the first thing we're doing is we're writing as a percent. So percent again means per 100. So what am I going to do to get 5 to 100? Times 20. So if I multiply the numerator times 20, that's going to give us, oops, I put another 0 up there. So that's going to give us 60. So 60 per 100, it means 60 per cent. 60%. So once we have the percent, so now we want to change this to a decimal. So we are going to read which fraction? 60 over 100. Very good. 60 over 100, if I read it correctly, is 60 hundredths. Right? If I read the fraction correctly, that's 60 hundredths. So how do I write 60 hundredths as a decimal? 0.60, 0.60. And of course, do I need that trailing zero? No, we don't need that. So we're going to write 0.6. So these are my answers. I'm going to highlight them. We've got the 60% and we've got the 0.6. Example 3 says write fractions as percents and decimals. We just did this. But what if the fraction does not convert directly to per 100? So let's look at 5/12. So 5/12, we want to change that to a percent, right? Percent means per 100. So we want 100 in the denominator, and we want to figure out what goes up here. Does that look familiar to you? If I can't go from 12 to 100, what other method do you know to solve this? Very good. We are going to cross multiply. So when we cross multiply, and you are allowed to use your calculators, we have 12 times x on this side, and on that side we have 5 times 100 is 500. Then we will divide by 12 on both sides. So here, those 12s cancel, and x is equal to, x is equal to, so that's 500 divided by 12. That gives us 41.6 repeating, okay? So if I said round to the nearest 10th, what would that be? 41.7. 41.7. Very good. So that would be 41.7. And because this is over 100, this is 41.7%. Is everybody clear with that? All right. Now, that's my percent. Okay. We change that to a percent, and that's my first answer, 41.7%. Now, we want to change 41.7% to a decimal. Well, what fraction am I going to read? Well, let's see. Percent means what? Per 100, right? So I'm going to write it 41.7 per 100. Is everyone with me? Now, we can't have a decimal in a fraction. Okay? We're writing a decimal. We can't have a decimal in fraction because then that would not be simplified. Okay? So, we need that numerator to become a whole number. How do I change 41.7 to a whole number? So we're going to move this decimal to the right, okay? One time. If I move the decimal to the right one time, what am I multiplying by? 10. Very good. So here we're going to multiply times 10 times 10. Is everybody with me? So this is going to give me 417 over 1,000. So now, can I read that fraction correctly, please? Thousandths. How do I write 417 thousandths? 0.417. And there is my decimal. Is everybody clear? All right. So there's my decimal. Take a minute to do the next one on your own. With your table partners. All right. So for 7/16 as a percent, we need to write per 100. So we're going to cross multiply. And when we cross multiply, over here, we end up with 43.75%. Now, percent means per 100. So here, that's going to be 43.75 over 100. We want this top number to be a whole number. We can't have decimals. So if we're moving the decimal 2 places to the right, that means we're multiplying times 100. Is everybody with me? So when we multiply times 100, that gives us 4,375 over 10,000. If I want to read that correctly, that gives me 4,375 10,000ths. And there is my decimal. So we're writing down percents and decimals that we got from the lecture. So if I go down here, there's another one. This is 28%. And the decimal is what? 0.28. So this is 28%. And the decimal was 0.28. Is everyone with me? Let's go to this page. Let's see. Here we have 60%, and the decimal was 0.6. Yeah. So, 60%, my decimal is 0.6. Okay? Let's take one more. Let's go back over here, and let's take this 41.7%. So 41.7%, and my decimal was what? 0.417. What do you notice? So they're all the same numbers, right? But the decimal in each one of these are all at the end, because except for this one, this is right here. Is everyone with me? Where's decimal over here? So here, I moved the decimal 2 places to the left. Isn't that my decimal right there? Look it over here. 2 places to the left. Isn't that my decimal? How about this? 2 places to the left. Isn't that my decimal? If I take away that trailing 0. Okay, so that's right. And then how about this one? 2 places to the left. Isn't that my decimal? Yeah. So, to change from a percent to a decimal, all we have to do is move the decimal to the left. How many spaces? 2 times. So what if I want to go from a decimal to a percent? Move the decimal to the right. How many times? Twice. Very good.